What do you get when you cross a soybean, an epic road trip, and a giant whisk? No, seriously, guess. No, but that's close. Now, this episode. Tofu is an ancient food. Legend says that it's been produced in China since the Han Dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago. But it wasn't until the 10th century that it really caught on and spread beyond China's borders. Now today, it is broadly consumed around the world with true devotees in East, Southeast, and South Asia, as well as obviously here in the US. Interestingly, soybeans have long had a foothold here in the US, but they were mostly used for animal feed, soil revitalization, to actually add nitrogen to the soil, which is really cool, and cooking oils. The health food movement of the 1970s brought tofu into the spotlight here in the US. And as is always the case in this country, immigrants taught the nation how special and delicious it is. There is a huge, dizzying array of tofu styles out there. We have silken, medium firm, firm, extra firm, super firm, and all of that is just the tip of the iceberg. And they all start with soybeans. Those soybeans go on a journey that includes soaking, grinding, cooking, coagulating, and sometimes pressing. And today, we're gonna join them on that journey. And as everybody knows, that journey begins right in New York City. Road trip! Wow, here we are in New York City, the city of brotherly light by the bay. What a place. There are so many things to do. I can taste the local cuisine, find personalized souvenirs, visit all of my favorite stores, and make memories that will last a lifetime. Our tofu journey starts right here in Times Square. Wait, we were supposed to meet Grace in Chinatown. And our adventure starts right here in Chinatown. I am so honored to be joined by my dear friend, award-winning cookbook author, Grace Young. Grace is a vocal advocate for AAPI communities, a wok cooking expert, and today's generous guide through New York's vibrant Chinatown. She's offered to bring me to meet Paul Eng at his tofu shop Fong On Division Street in the heart of Chinatown.
I'm bringing you to Fong On, which is one of my all-time favorite stores in Chinatown.
Wow.
It's been around for over 80 years, and Paul Eng, the owner, is going to show us how to make tofu today.
I'm so excited, let's do this. Paul's grandfather started making tofu at this location in 1933 and sold it at their storefront Fong In 2 on Mott Street for more than 80 years. That shop closed in 2017. When Paul decided to reopen the shop, he faced incredible obstacles. One of the biggest, family legacy recipes had disappeared when the shop closed.
It was one of those kind of family recipe through folklore, you know? It was a cup of this, a spoon of that. My father knew the recipe, and everybody else was taught by my father or somebody at a certain time, and they were just given a set of tools to do so.
So how did he learn how to make great tofu? Science, baby.
I had to set out to relearn all the recipes from a scientific standpoint, you know. It had to be measured, and then, of course, now that I figured out the measurements of everything, there is that other part that is about feel.
And if you ask Grace Young, you did a really good job.
I just have to say, as a local, when you reopened in 2019, it was so fantastic to actually have great tasting tofu again. Because Chinatown wasn't the same.
And Chinatown won't be the same. You know, it's always changing, and it's always, you know, and the main thing is just kind of progressing forward. I mean, we've had ideas in the past where we were trying to transcend Chinatown too, you know, but there was always this idea of trying to make tofu more palatable to other people other than Asians, you know, or treat it differently. Oh, why don't we make a tofu burger or a tofu, you know? And my point of view was always it should be eaten or at least presented in its original form, right? People can take tofu and do whatever they want later on with it, but it should be presented in its original form because it tastes good just as it is.
I couldn't agree more. Now let's see how he does it. Paul starts with soybeans, but not just any soybeans. He gets his non-GMO soybeans locally sourced from farms in the New York region. The beans are soaked at room temperature for at least 6 hours or up to overnight. He works with about 90 pounds of soybeans a day. After soaking, the soybeans are poured into a grinder along with a steady spray of water. Both the amount of water and its temperature are carefully controlled. The front tank fills with creamy white, protein-rich soy milk. beautiful, and the pulp empties into a second tank in the back. Paul then grinds this pulp a second time to extract as much rich liquid as possible from the soybeans. So now we've got a tub of gorgeous soy milk and a bucket full of ground soybean pulp. This is destined for tofu, and this is destined for use as fertilizer. The next step is heating the soy milk in order to deactivate enzymes. One particular enzyme, lipooxygenase, is responsible for an undesirable beanie flavor that can be present in some soy milk. Paul pumps the soy milk into 2 stainless steel tanks where steam is forced through the liquid to bring it to a boil and then hold it there for about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay, this is really exciting because we're at my first favorite part of the process, coagulation. And yes, I have multiple favorite parts of the process. Trust me, you will too. Now I know coagulation doesn't sound like the most delicious word, but it's the very reason that we can go from liquid soy milk to tender, wobbly, delicious bites of tofu. Coagulants link the soybean proteins together in order to form a gel-like structure that traps all of that water in place. Very cool. Now, there are a few options when it comes to coagulants. There is magnesium chloride, also known as nigari, which is extracted from seawater and it's a popular choice for making Japanese tofu. There's calcium sulfate, also known as gypsum, and that's used a lot in beer making and available at homebrew stores. And magnesium sulfate, also known as Epsom salts. That one is readily available at supermarkets. Another, called glucono-delta-lactone, is used in big industrial production. And funny story, it's actually the fraternity that I pledged in college. I didn't get it. Believe it or not, acids like lemon juice and vinegar can also do the job, but they're not used commercially and both leave an acidic taste behind. The type of coagulant will have an impact on the texture of the tofu, and that's why some producers use different coags, that's our little nickname for them, depending on the type of tofu they're making. Paul used to do that, but he now prefers calcium sulfate, aka gypsum, for all of his tofu. Eddie, who has been making tofu with Paul's family for 35 years, has placed a precise amount of calcium sulfate solution in each of these buckets. And now he masterfully pours the hot soy milk into each. While it certainly looks cool to pour from up high like that, Eddie isn't doing this for style points, though he still gets the points. I want to be really clear about that. He's not doing it for the points, but he still gets them, okay? The gypsum does its job rapidly, so the goal is to thoroughly mix the hot soy milk and the coagulant quickly, and the agitation of pouring from up high does just that. In just a minute or two, the buckets of soy milk form into a lovely gel. Now here's where I should back up and mention that Paul makes 3 kinds of tofu at Fong On. He makes 2 kinds of block tofu, soft and firm, and a silken style that he calls tofu pudding. For all block style tofu, that gel needs to be broken up in order to release whey, and then pressed to expel some of it. Paul starts this process with a giant whisk. I love this thing. The more he breaks up the gel, the faster the whey will release. Now, Paul's grandfather used stones to press tofu and formed individual blocks one at a time. Paul's setup is a bit more modern with stainless steel hydraulic presses. Though it's important to note that Paul's production is still tiny. It's very hands-on and artisanal. After lining a perforated tray with muslin, he ladles the broken gel in. 1 bucket perfectly fills 1 tray. Then he repeats and stacks trays before pressing twice. Just look at all that whey. While often the difference between firmness of block tofu is the result of how much pressing is done, i.e. more pressing equals firmer tofu, Paul does things a little differently. He strains out more soy milk solids when making soft tofu and leaves more of them in for making firm. That way, he can press them both to the exact same size and get 2 different textures. Very cool. After about 15 minutes and 2 pressings, the tofu is ready to be cut into blocks. Now just check out this reveal. He removes the metal mold, peels back the muslin, and look at that gorgeous expanse of creamy white tofu. Now it's time to cut. Paul cuts his tofu by hand with focused precision. I would say that this is the most visually satisfying part of the process, but you haven't seen what comes next. That's right, my second favorite part of the process. Fresh tofu needs to be stored in water to keep it moist and lovely. Check out this tofu slide. And now, check it out again. This time in slow motion. Man, I could do that all day. But it is time for tofu pudding. For his silken tofu, Paul sets strained soy milk with coagulant and then nothing else. Once set, it's taken straight to the front of the shop to serve a line of waiting customers. And this is the tofu that Grace and I can't wait to taste. Grace orders hers with ginger syrup, and because she's really nice, she lets me have a bite. That is so good. And I can't help going for Paul's savory version, which features pickled radish, fried shallots, scallions, dried shrimp, sesame oil, and chili sauce. Paul tells me to mix mine up, and then I let Grace try it first. And then I dig in. Oh man, this is perfect. Honestly, this might be the best bite of tofu I've ever had. It's ethereal. It holds together just long enough to get into your mouth before it collapses back into rich, creamy soy milk. The toppings add pops of texture, salt, and umami. The best part about tofu pudding is it is light enough that you can basically just keep eating it all day long. But I have a lot of jealous friends back in Boston who aren't currently eating this tofu pudding. I've promised to buy some of Paul's fresh block tofu and bring it back to make one of my all-time favorite tofu dishes, mapo tofu. I pick up a couple blocks of soft and a couple blocks of firm. Let's hit the road and go to the kitchen. You gotta give me a minute. Traffic on the Verrazano was brutal. Mapo tofu, the iconic Sichuanese classic, is one of my favorite tofu dishes, but I've never made it with super fresh handmade tofu. Let's do this. The first step is to cut 2 blocks of Paul's soft tofu into cubes and then poach them briefly. This gives the tofu a slightly firmer structure so that it holds together during the braise. This step is often done with boiling water, but I'm using some chicken broth seasoned with scallions and I'm using the microwave. Then we make our incredible spice paste with garlic, ginger, doubanjiang, which is a spicy broad bean paste, fermented black beans, oil, Sichuan chili powder, and tingly Sichuan peppercorns. Now it is time to cook. I'm using 85% lean ground beef, but you could also substitute pork. Once it begins to brown, I will transfer it to a bowl. Then we sizzle our spice paste until dark and fragrant. In goes our tofu and broth, along with hoisin, sesame oil, and our beef. Finally, we thicken with a simple cornstarch slurry. Top with a few more Sichuan peppercorns and serve with plenty of steamed rice. Just look at that. Perfect creamy cubes of fresh tofu, super savory, spicy, tingly sauce. Am I drooling? Whether you're hanging out at Paul Eng's Fong On with the incomparable Grace Young eating silky spoonfuls of tofu pudding, or serving up a batch of this soul-warming mapo tofu, this is without a doubt how to eat tofu. I've got a lot of folks to thank for this one and some great next steps for all you tofu lovers. The first is to check out Andrew Nguyen's book, Asian Tofu. There's almost 100 recipes for amazing tofu dishes, plus history, culture, and production. It's a must get. While you're buying your book, make sure to pick up Grace Young's Breath of a Wok. It's a classic if you don't have it. Big thanks to Paul Eng and Fong On, the entire staff there, for bringing us in and showing us how tofu comes to life. Please support your local AAPI restaurants and businesses. They need it now more than ever. If you can't make it to New York's Chinatown, just go around the corner to your local Asian restaurant or grocer. Take a video or picture of whatever you're eating or buying and post it on social media with the hashtag #LoveAAPI. Thanks a lot and happy eating.